So for this week, I was pretty lazy. Not only did I forget to stream completely and forget to set up an entire new video, I stayed up until 8 AM playing modded Terraria with some mates, so yeah. But that does give me an opportunity here. While I don't have any real footage, I have been getting a request to do something like this for a while now, and so here we are. Ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, I present to you the Yakuza game tier list as brought to you by Big Man Cow. I don't know how to refer to myself yet. But just remember that this tier list is highly opinionated. And while my opinion is absolutely the pinnacle of ideas and thought, it is my opinion. Alright, so let's jump into it. First off, the criteria. What counts as a Yakuza game in this tier list? Really, as long as it's a mainline game, I'll include it. So what this means is that we won't be seeing Ishin in here, or Kenzan, or Dead Souls, not even the Ishin remake. Alright, those are all spin-offs, they do not count here. But what this does include would be Gaiden, considering that it tells Kiryu's perspective of the events of 7 and blah blah blah, you get the point, it happens in the timeline, it's canonical, we're following it. Now, all of these games are ranked largely on how positive my experience was with them, so how much fun that I had, or how much enjoyment or entertainment did I get out of the storyline, the gameplay, the blah blah blah. It's not just going to be solely focused on one element. So let's begin from the start of the timeline with Yakuza 0. Now, like many people, my Yakuza journey started with 0. During the middle of COVID, I remember we were just put into lockdown for the first time, and the amount of time that I sunk into this just really saved me during those days. For the just super absurdly cheap price that I got it for, I think it was on special at the time, I got endless hours of fun out of this game. With all of the sub-stories and the mini-games, you go from the intense mainline story, with Kuze, Nishikiyama, Shibusawa, and of course Kiryu, and then you just jump straight into some random minigame like fucking Pocket Racer or the dancing minigame. There was just such a big contrast in tonality that it just really brought a fresh air onto me and really pulled me through those times where, you're stuck inside your room, bored beyond belief, nothing to do. And it didn't mess with my perception of the games either. It was a perfect starting point. As it's set before the very first game, it actually is kind of isolated with all of its events as its kind of own unique story. Kind of separate from the rest of the games, but at the same time, I'm still counting it in this list because fuck you, why would I not? All in all, it serves as a fantastic trial run to see if somebody can, really get into the storyline or if they really understand the feel of the game. You also get some fun combat as well at the same time. You get the style switching, which is relatively intuitive, very fun to make use of, and just a lot of room to master it. And oh my god, the dynamic intros, getting to experience all of these things for the first time, unbelievable stuff. And then you've also got the storyline to back it all up. It's just a fantastic introduction to the series that I think most people would easily be able to fall in love with. But with this being said, even though I do absolutely love it, I did end up loving some of the other games in the series just a bit more, which means that Yakuza 0 gets placed into a very respectable A tier for a true classic. Next up, Yakuza Kiwami. And yes, I am going to be ranking Kiwami instead of the original. That goes for 2 as well, but I just feel like that the originals would still find themselves in similar positions in this tier list. Besides, I haven't really played the originals, so I can't really judge them anyway. So anyway, Kiwami 1 is essentially the original Yakuza game, but for people that liked 0. Alright, it's as simple as that. It looks like 0, feels like 0. If it had a smell-o-vision support, it'd smell like 0, but they really just took Yakuza 0, copy and pasted the whole game, and then lovingly and painstakingly recreated all of the original cutscenes and voiceovers, which is pristine, but then they just kind of, slapped it all together. Now, the original storyline is decent. It's definitely not as strong as 0, which, makes sense considering it was released absolutely eons ago. But where I personally feel that Kiwami is held back is definitely with the gameplay. It is essentially identical to 0, which got very stale, at least for me. The style switching saw slight improvements, which, is a nice touch, but I don't know, I can't really describe it that easily, but it just felt like I was playing the same game over again, and once I saw that, I just couldn't get that taste out of my mouth. I couldn't just ignore it, that it was just the same game. I was playing 0 again, but just with a different storyline. It just didn't feel right. It's really hard to describe, but I just didn't enjoy it. You know, maybe I was just bad at it. You know, I suck with the zero combat as well. And oh my god, Majima everywhere. The first time I saw it was funny. I'll admit, it was really funny. You know, just seeing Majima come out from absolutely nowhere and fight him, you know. And then it happened again, and then again, and again. And then it got really annoying, being forcibly roped into this boss fight every single time that I would turn a corner. Like, I mean, I love Majima as much as the next person does, but wow, give me just 10 minutes to, like, you know, actually do something. Just because I'm playing Yakuza doesn't mean that I want to run into the characters all the time, alright? There's sub-stories that I want to go do. There's main story missions that I want to go do. I don't want to just run into Majima every single time I turn a corner. And then right when I do want to actually find him to try and level the system up, he's fucking impossible to find. He's like in a cone somewhere that you just really need to look for. I don't know, it's just the most annoying system that could have possibly been put into the game. Also, just want to add, no secondary character really makes the four styles feel a lot more generic and less fun. I know it's just a perspective kind of thing. All I'm trying to say is that there's not a lot of variety. You don't get to switch it up. You're not placed into like a new set of shoes and, you know, try something new, try something else. You get a little bit spoiled and you don't appreciate the style switching that you've actually been given. All in all though, it's a solid game. I got a couple complaints here and there, specifically, you know, it's just getting bland, but still definitely weaker than Zero. We're dropping this one into C tier. Now let's move right on into Kiwami 2. Now this is what a Kiwami game should be. Admittedly, it was released after Yakuza 6, so a lot of time's passed between Kiwami 1 and 2, but my god, did that time need to pass. You see, Kiwami 2 uses the new Dragon engine, which just makes the game look absolutely fantastic. It's like just visually distinct. It stands out from all the other Yakuza games. Of course, though, 6 does have a very similar visual style running on the same engine, but you still get the point. 0 through till 5 all had a similar visual style. Kiwami 2 and Yakuza 6 just spices things up just that little bit. You know, a lot more contrast, higher model details, and oh my goodness, that special little effect that glows around you, that glowing stuff. There's just something about it. They've added like a little special touch to it, and I absolutely love the way that it looks, the way that it feels. Speaking of how it feels, it's got a very different style of combat from Zero and Kiwami, you know, the style switching and whatnot. It's very fluid and powerful, matches up nicely with the Yakuza 6 combat style, you know, with the addition of charging up some light attacks as well as the heavy attacks that you'd be able to charge up in 6. And just as a first-time newcomer, getting to try out the extreme heat mode, oh my god, there's just so much about this game that I personally fell in love with right at the very start. In fact, there's so much I loved about this game that I don't even know if what I said before was, like, realistic. I don't know if there was a point to any of that. All I'm saying is that it feels like a brand new game, and it feels amazing. The only drawback that Kiwami 2 has visually that I could point out straight away, and I'm pretty sure most people could, is that everything was a weird blue or green shade. I don't really remember which one as I'm writing the script, but it was just a little bit odd to notice. But you know, that's just a subtle little thing, a little bit of theming, doesn't hold the game back whatsoever. Now, the biggest difference that your average Yakuza player is going to be able to pick up on right off the bat is the fact that dynamic intros from Kiwami 1 to 2 go so incredibly crazy. There's a lot better use of camera angles, and just the integration between the fights is so good. The slow-mos, everything about it, the sound design, the names flying in, it just fits. It's like you're watching a movie and you're fighting in the movie at the same time. It's just such a cool idea that integrates the cutscenes with the gameplay so well, and just, oh, it's awesome. And because of this, there's a whole bunch of super memorable moments that just really stick in your head. Like, even the live rendered stuff looks fantastic. All of this as well, all this visual style, all of this fun inside of the actual combat itself is combined with a awesome storyline as well. Ryuji Gotoku might just be the single most memorable antagonist from all of the games, at least for me. Like, his dynamic intro alone, right at the very end of the game, is probably the single dynamic intro that I would show to somebody if I had to, you know, explain to them what the Yakuza series was about with one video. I'd just send them that dynamic intro and be like, that's what the whole series feels like. And Gota is so memorable, so legendary, that even in the sub-stories beyond Yakuza 3, he's still mentioned. His name is still dropped, and people in-game, funnily enough, still think that he's out and about. Spoiler warning for those people that hadn't played through the games yet. And if you're playing the games in chronological order, this is probably the highlight of the series for you. Everything up till this point, Kiwami 2, is top-notch. You know, of course, there's just a couple things lacking here and there, but I can guarantee you that enjoyment is not one of them. And honestly, I enjoyed it a lot more than 0. But even though I did love it, it wasn't quite enough to break into S tier, placing this again at a very respectable A tier. Now, Yakuza 3, known by a couple different names, Blockuza 3, Grabkuza 3, or as I would like to call it, holy shit, please let me play the goddamn Gamecuza 3. Now, to sum up this game in a couple words, it's a bit of a mess. And now, of course, you know, I played through the remaster, and there's a couple issues with the port, in particular some logic tied in with the FPS, and I'll try to overlook that as best as I can. But the sheer fact that that needs to be a consideration is kind of egregious, right? It really says something about the quality of Yakuza 3. But you know, I completely understand. RGG didn't port the game themselves, they were in control of it, so it's not their fault, and hence I won't be judging it based off of, you know, those blemishes in particular. But it still does need to be said though. With the stupidly high blocking rates, and the number of enemies that spawn with weapons, and their attack timing, it's plain old encounters on the street are a pain in the ass to deal with. And while I do understand the argument of, you know, you learn to play around their blocking rather than just mashing buttons, it still means that fights on the street take significantly longer than anyone would really like to spend on them, especially in the early game before you unlock some of your abilities. And even when you do unlock some of your abilities, Kiryu feels a little bit weak in places, especially after coming down from the power trip that is Kiwami 2. And yes, it is a bit unfair to compare Kiwami 2 to the Yakuza 3 Remastered. I get it, Kiwami 2 is much more modern, very different. But I mean, that honestly doesn't really excuse it from the story parts of the game. You know, considering that Kiwami 2, just like Kiwami 1, is a replica of the original, which means that the way that Yakuza 3 holds up to Kiwami 2 in comparison with the story and characters, it's kind of a little bit disappointing, honestly. Like, Rikia was probably the most notable character in terms of people that work alongside Kiryu, and Mine is a pretty memorable antagonist, but you compare them to Gota and Date, and I mean, they can't really hold that much of a candle if I'm being honest. Also, I don't think I've got any footage of this, but the final long segment of the game, I absolutely hated it. Now, this is probably personal bias and me just being bad at the game, but it took me an entire hour to get through it because of a single mini-boss, one guy who had just a bit of a bigger health bar than the rest, who blocked so goddamn much that literally only one basic combo ever worked on him. It was something like 3 light strikes into 3 heavy strikes, and then only the very last hit would actually land through the block and do a single slither of his health bar as damage. It just felt stupid that I had to stand there and do that move over and over and over again because it was the only thing that worked. Now, admittedly, I am a dumbass. I don't think I brought any Torrenter. I think I was using Toughness ZZ or something, so I didn't have any heat charge, so I couldn't heat action him. But just, holy shit, you shouldn't have to have consumables to beat a boss within like 10 minutes. It shouldn't be a requirement. And you know what, this game is actually very forgettable as well, just in terms of the story as a whole, because honestly, I don't remember much of what happened throughout the game. There was something about wanting to build a missile silo or a theme park where the orphanage is, and some internal war going on, Big Daddy Daigo stepping in to try and, save the orphanage and blah blah blah. I don't really know. Either way, this game just felt really lame in comparison to the previous 2 entries, especially in terms of the story. D tier. After Yakuza 3, we start to pick things back up with Yakuza 4. The last few games felt like the storytelling was trying to find a mix between absurd and believable right up until Yakuza 4 came along, where it hits the sweet spot in between, and by the sweet spot in between, I mean veers all the way left into the ridiculous angle, and just has some of the stupidest plot points that you will ever see in gaming. Actually in any form of media at all. The very concept of the rubber bullets premise is so outrageously stupid, and I don't understand why it was even a thing, but at this point, it's why I love it so much. It feels like that the writers of the story got some form of a list and just said, fuck it, we'll run it and make it work. But outside some of the stupidest writing that I've ever seen, it does introduce some of the coolest and most beloved characters within the entirety of the series. You kick the game off as Akiyama, who is basically just some rich guy that managed to stumble his way into the Yakuza world while literally just giving away money because he's a good guy, and can also somehow fight really well while almost exclusively using his legs. He's a crazy sounding character with a crazy sounding theme, by the way. Then you've got Saejima, whose health bar is bigger than my future prospects in life and might as well have the rubber equivalent of Midas touch because he bounces human beings off of the ground as if they are a play ball. And then wrapping up their new introductions to the series, Tanimura, who, if I'm going to be completely honest, I don't really like. I mean, I enjoy the character, I think it's a cool idea and really cool in concept, but it's just that he's a little bit less interesting than Saejima and Akiyama to me. And in terms of execution as well, his style and combat was very off-putting to me. It relies largely on, waiting for your opponent and countering, the whole parry feature, and I'm not a huge fan of that. I mean, you don't see me using the Tiger Drop at all throughout any of the footage in the games, and that's partly because I just completely stink, right? I suck really, really bad, so I don't know if I could Tiger Drop consistently, but I also prefer to, use combos and stuff. But I mean, hey, his basic kit is still pretty interesting, and it's just a single small drawback in an absolute sea of positives. The pure variety in the characters, the ridiculous storytelling that just makes you giggle occasionally, and IGG hitting the sweet spot between, stupid gag cutscenes and some actual serious storytelling here and there, it just all adds up to a fantastic experience. And, aside from a few sour notes, such as the single worst final boss fight in the entire series, and by series I mean like every game that IGG has ever produced. Like, oh my god, this man just purely pisses me off thinking about having to fight him. But even still, with those few sour notes, it's very easy to ignore and listen to the beautifully composed symphony of For Faith that only members of the most prestigious tier can listen to. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, the first member of the S tier. Now, Yakuza 5, I'm going to try and be really quick with this one. It's kind of mid. 5 just feels very like 4 in terms of the combat. They made Akiyama a bit weaker. The same thing happens with Saejima. I think Kiryu does feel a little bit stronger, to be fair, but they've taken out Tanimura and replaced him with Shinada, who is, again, a cool character design and idea, being a baseball player, but again, the actual gameplay with him is somehow even worse. It's dog shit. His basic moveset is pretty goddamn slow and feels really bland with a massive focus on grabs, which, would be cool, a really cool idea, if bosses just didn't shrug him off like he was a goddamn fly. But aside from the really basic moveset that he comes with that focuses on grappling and, heat actioning on the ground and stuff and blah blah blah, he does get the capability to make use of weapons and equipable gear a lot more than all of the other protagonists so far, which I hated even more than his base kit. I mean, the fact that you need to use a weapon to make this guy strong, it is just not fun to me. I really, really did not appreciate playing as him. I like this side of the story, not his gear, not his weapons, not how he played. I also felt really weird when I had to play as Haruka as well. Not because Haruka is a bad character or anything, she's a great character, but I don't know, the transition from street fights as Kiryu and bashing people down, just everything that Yakuza 4 into dance battles on the street, it just felt really harsh to me. It just didn't make much sense. It's so far out of character for the game series that I couldn't really appreciate it. And then you've also got the storyline as well, which for the most part was pretty interesting. I kind of liked a lot of it, but the tie-in with everything right at the very end was very weak. Things came to a climax way too quickly with, way too much. I don't know how to say it. It's like there's a lot of build-up to the last chapter, but everything in the game also happens in the last chapter. Like, for example, the main antagonist is revealed right at the very end of the game. And then you fight that main antagonist, and then you move on, and it's just, I don't know, I would have liked to get to know the characters that we'd be playing against a lot more, and it just kind of makes the ending of the game feel a bit understated to me. The pacing is just off. It could have been fantastic, but I don't know, something felt odd about that. The way that it felt really slapped together towards at the end. Like, the main antagonist, I've already said that he's just kind of revealed right at the very end, but I don't even remember why he was promoted from a side character to, like, you know, the big boss fight right at the very end of the game. This is going to sound kind of stupid for me to say, but it felt like that they wrote this storyline from beginning to end and then kind of struggled to come up with an ending. I know that that's, you know, probably how most people think of stories, but either way, whatever my point was there, it's still way better than the slog that was Yakuza 3, so it's definitely not joining D tier, but we'll bump it up to C tier. Now let's move on to Yakuza 6, The Song of Life. Funnily enough, not the game where you sing and dance, but instead it is the debut of the brand new Dragon engine, which means that Yakuza 6 comes with all of the visual perks that you get in Kiwami 2. So of course, big thumbs up in that department right there. Yakuza 6 is also supposed to serve as the quote-unquote conclusion of Kiryu's saga, you know, being the final game that he's supposed to be involved in. But I mean, we all know how that turned out. Now, Yakuza 6 had a completely wild storyline, one that was a lot more serious and less comedic than the other games, which makes sense. It's the conclusion of Kiryu's tale. It's his final game as, you know, a main protagonist. And that extra seriousness with, you know, a lot less silly, goofy moments kept me very engaged throughout the entirety of the game. Very into the storyline in a way that the previous games hadn't quite done. You know, every other game had me kind of laughing in between the cutscenes, you know, going to do other random things, or, you know, just the occasional little funny side to the storyline. I don't really know what I'm trying to say here, but that extra level of depth within the storytelling really hooked me. Really, really hooked me. But what's really interesting is that while I was hooked and engorged with the story, I think that kind of doesn't play into the Yakuza's strengths. You see, something interesting that I noticed was that in all of the Yakuza games, whenever I was having fun with the main storyline, I was also doing side content. I was doing sub-stories, I was doing random mini-games, I was doing Pocket Circuit, you know, the cabaret clubs, and just in general exploring the environments and having fun. But with Yakuza 6, the story gripped me so much that I found myself mainlining the entire storyline and not really getting invested in any of the side content. The amount of encounters that I just ran past because I honestly couldn't care about what some random character on the street had to talk to me about, it was just most of the game that I spent going straight towards those quest markers. Which is kind of disappointing, especially when you consider just how much effort went into all of the sub-stories. Like, I don't have exact counts or anything right now, but the amount of sub-stories that were voiced before with full-on, you know, cutscenes and conversation, there weren't many of them before 6. But I'd swear I just ran into 3 or 4 in 6 right off the bat. Now, as this was actually released before Kiwami 2, you know, Kiwami 2 being the remake of Yakuza 2 and all that, the combat wasn't quite tuned right. Because, you know, in Kiwami 2, you felt like an absolute powerhouse. You were super strong, you were having a lot of fun, you had charge-ups on all of your attacks, but in 6, you feel a little bit weak, honestly. You know, and this could just be me feeling differences that don't exist between Kiwami 2 and Yakuza 6, but it definitely does apply for the rest of the games. In 6, your attacks are just that little bit slower, dashes take a bit longer, and in general, you just don't feel quite as strong or responsive as some of the other games. But don't get me wrong, it's still plenty of fun, and the story is very gripping, you know, very engaging, and kept me strapped in for the admittedly super long cutscenes. But even though the change up to the serious storyline is super interesting, I do kind of miss the urge to just run around and explore the map, you know, see what each stage, what each level, each area, each city, each town has to offer, you know what I mean? 6 does indeed have its drawbacks, but at the same time, it's definitely better than Kiwami 1 and Yakuza 5. It doesn't quite break onto the same stage that 2 and 0 did, which lands it at a very respectable B tier. Now, the next game coming up is a little bit controversial. In particular for its combat changes, Yakuza Like a Dragon was the first game in the Yakuza series to switch from the standard action brawler into a turn-based RPG combat system. And of course, as of this video releasing, it is the only Yakuza game officially released that is turn-based. Unless, of course, you count the Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth combat demo or demo. I don't know, I haven't played the demo yet, but the point is, Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth isn't on this list because it's not out yet, but it will also have the same style of combat. But anyway, that's not the point. Understandably, the change up in combat did leave some fans scratching their heads and just really feeling kind of upset about, both saying goodbye to Kiryu as a protagonist and having the entire way that you play the game switched up on you. Not to mention that the entire roster of playable characters had been changed too, which means no more play as Akiyama, no more play as Saejima, but instead you're given a new gang of people to play as, with a brand new protagonist, Ichiban, making his debut into the franchise. Now, this is just going to be me being a fucking idiot, but I played it at a very strange point in the series, completely out of order. Now, I can't remember exactly when I played it. It was either after Kiwami 2 or Yakuza 3, but by that point in the series, I already knew that I was in for the long haul. I also picked it up because it came out roughly half a year prior to whenever I played this game. And it was also on special too, so, just the stars aligned, and yeah. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, it was probably after Kiwami 2, because I got it on a Steam bundle, and I was waiting for the remastered games to come out. Was it come out? No, it was wait for them to come off a special. Anyway, we'll ignore that for the moment. But in terms of the turn-based combat that had the fan base basically split in half as to whether they should support the change or not, I was somebody who was very welcome to this change of pace. Because, while I do seriously enjoy and love the vicious heat actions and brutal combos that Kiryu can pull on people, taking my time and going slowly was actually really fun, especially with the brand new characters and the bosses that you get to fight within the game as well. Because, after all, I do love a good numbers game. But besides the fun switch up in combat, Ichiban did turn out as a fantastic protagonist as well, with arguably the best voice acting that I've heard in video games, full stop, producing quite possibly my favorite cutscene and performance that I have ever had the pleasure of witnessing. Seriously, the dedication that goes into this guy, the pure and raw emotion that you get from Ichiban, it's fantastic. It's a very big switch up from, the typical Yakuza approach of a character doesn't react, gets a little bit angry, and then ends everything by smiling, pretending everything's perfectly fine. Whereas Ichiban, so much more emotional, really, really, I don't know what to say actually. I just loved the way that he was written and loved the way that he's more realistic, that he's more human, That kind of character in games is really cool to me. But the gameplay changes being interesting, a new set of characters to explore and interact with, of course the beautiful graphics of the Dragon Engine, some serious effort and dedication by the voice actors, all of this combined with a fantastic storyline. You take all that into consideration, and I gladly invite Like a Dragon to the top of the list. Welcome to the S tier, buddy. And now, ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together, because we are about to announce the longest name in the series award. And this award goes to none other than Like a Dragon, Gaiden, the man who erased his name, with a total of 2 subtitles for the game. Okay, that's enough fucking around. We'll actually get to the game now. Like a Dragon Gaiden serves as a tie-in on Kiryu's side of the story into Yakuza Like a Dragon. I'm going to call it 7 because otherwise it gets very confusing. This is also where the name change takes place, which is why it's not Yakuza game, it's Like a Dragon now. We're going off of the Steam names, alright? That's what I'm reading off of. Don't yell at me, please. Now, I haven't actually finished my playthrough of this yet. I'm roughly halfway through the main story and about half of my life deep into the arena and pocket circuit minigames. So this ranking is going to be based on 2 things. Firstly, what I've played through and experienced so far, and a single Discord message that a friend has messaged me when he's played through the game. So the combat plays a little bit like Kiwami 2, but with a dash of Zero's style switching, essentially having the Kiwami 2 moveset as one style, the Yakuza style, and a brand new moveset designed specifically for this game, known as Agent. I've already done a whole video on Like a Dragon Gaiden. Basically, Agent style, martial arts combined with high-tech gadgets, kinda silly, kinda goofy, but kinda cool, and the classic Kiryu brute force punching his way through everything as the Yakuza style. So far, I believe I finished Chapter 3, and the storyline is very engaging, with a couple of really interesting characters popping up in it as well that I personally hope that we get to see more of going forward. And from what I've heard, beyond Chapter 3, it's supposed to get even more engaging and even more interesting. Again, to reiterate, I haven't played past Chapter 3, so this is based on what a mate has told me about their playthrough, alright? But they were bawling, and when I say bawling, I mean bawling at the end of this game. So the story is supposed to be absolutely phenomenal. And the mate that told me that they were bawling at the end of the game, he's got some pretty good taste, so I'm going to trust him on this one and say that the story is very high quality. And again, it's reusing the Dragon engine, so even more beautiful visuals and just, it looks even better than the past couple of games. I mean, just look around. Every single inch of this game is absolutely breathtaking and beautiful. Right now, at least for me, Gaiden is sitting in this weird zone between two different tiers. It's either S tier or A tier, and I'm not entirely too sure which it is at the moment. If you were to ask me, based off of what I've played so far, I'd say that it's A tier, alright, with where I'm at in the story. But seeing that most people tend to have absolutely great things to say about this game, and if the Steam reviews are anything to judge, I'm gonna have to bump this one up a tier in anticipation. S tier. Alright, and that about wraps it up. That's all of the mainline games that are out currently. So let me know what you think about this tier list. Am I stupid? Do you think Yakuza 3 is the best game in the entire series? Or am I on the money with literally everything in this list? I don't know. Let me know what you think. Give your opinions down in the comments. And holy shit, the raw audio recording for this video is 36 minutes. I hope I don't have to edit all of that. Otherwise, I am fucked. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure that this video is long enough as it is, so I'm just going to end it abruptly. See you all in the next one. Hopefully it's a better video than this. Hopefully it's a little bit more effort, but you know, we'll see. We'll see.